Hello, dog lover. My name is Saro. I'm a dog trainer, also coach dog owners. And in this video, I have a special guest that is one of my icons, is one of my dreams come true, kind of people who get to talk to and get to learn from. His name is Matt Beisner. He's a dog behavior specialist and the host of Dog Impossible on Nat Geo Wild. And he's also the owner of Zen Dog in LA. Matt, thank you for being here. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about dogs and see how I can help. And I wanted to add some newer information. I was recently certified as a professional dog trainer with knowledge assessment from the CPDT. It's just been a real boon to the work I do to have the experience and then to add education that supports that. So,
nice.
Good timing for everybody.
Good. I'm very excited to talk to you. And before we get started, before starting to talk about your show and your dog psychology and training and modifying behaviors, I wanted to start first to talk to you about how did you get started on this journey of dog training? I'm sure there was a dog involved that gave you the push to get started. Can you tell us a short story, like where did you start?
Sure. When I was a kid, I loved dogs. We had a dog, and the dog was deemed untrainable, and it would run away, and it would destroy the house, et cetera, et cetera. And my stepmother did quite a bit of work to help the dog. But at the end of the day, he ended up biting her. We had to get rid of him. So that was my first introduction to being around dogs and then being heartbroken around the responses that adults have to make when a dog doesn't seem to be like a good fit for the home. And somewhere along the line, not long after that, it was a Halloween and I got bit by a dog as a kid, and then I just remained afraid of dogs, and then that just compounded. So for decades, probably the next 30 years, I was afraid of dogs. I ended up moving in with a woman about 13 years ago who had a little terrier who's actually featured on Dog Impossible, the little black terrier Kingston. And Kingston was aggressive, and I was home living with my girlfriend at the time, and I was home, and Kingston would attack me for no apparent reason. So that was the beginning of me having to address the fear that I had, because I was living with a dog. Even though he was 13 pounds, I was living with a dog that scared the bejesus out of me and actually, had intention to bite me and tried to on multiple occasions. I saw what I could based on what was available out there and read what I could, and I started applying some things, and they made some difference. And what I will say, I was not well. I happened to be a recovered drug addict and alcoholic, so I was actually detoxing at the time that I was moving in and living with my girlfriend, and I was basically homebound. So this little dog is terrorizing me, and I'm, not really in my right mind. But the point is that I started to try to help Kingston get his needs met. Take him for a walk. I began to make my day with my dog about what the dog needed. And that was a shift, because I was pretty selfish and self-centered to begin with. So when I started to focus on what the dog needed, I saw not only that the dog's behavior had the possibility of change, but also behavior changed because I was being a service to the dog. And then the reward for that was my girlfriend at the time introduced me to more dogs who were aggressive. And then it just kind of steamrolled from that. And I opened the Zen Dog. She and I split up, but Kingston is still with me, and I opened the Zen Dog as a company about a decade ago, and we opened our facility in Los Angeles about 6 years ago. And I'm fortunate to be able to work with all kinds of dogs and have met wonderful people and experts in the field, and people that whose level of understanding I aspire to have. And then obviously I got this great gift with being able to work on the show. And I don't know, it's probably 10,000 dogs later, and with all kinds of behavioral issues, and I'm known for working with dogs that are aggressive, and if I could, I'd keep helping them and work with as many puppies as possible so they wouldn't need help 3 years down the road when they were showing aggressive behavior. So I think that's about as short as I could make it.
So that was a fascinating story, and your story that you bring out and share with people, it involves also, as you said, you were detoxing, you were alcoholic, right? And
correct.
When you are in that zone, in that state of mind, do you think is similar to a dog who's also in that state of mind that is boxed in, and the behavior kind of helps it to develop all kinds of other behaviors?
Yeah, I do. That's an interesting question. I try not to put my human projection onto a dog, but what I can identify with is for example, I know that close to 90% of aggression is fear-based for dogs. I can definitely relate to that, because when I'm afraid, I tend to get angry or aggressive or get bigger or those kinds of things, thinking that I'm going to be able to protect myself. And that behavior often perpetuates itself because it seems to work. It seems to remove the perceived threat, unless, of course, it escalates the situation, in which case now I've got a confrontation that I actually started. I see parallels there. I also see parallels in terms of my fear of trusting, my being out in the world. There are a lot of things that I can identify in dog behavior that I relate to. So while I may not be projecting my stuff onto the dog, I see things in dog behavior that speak to me, and I'm inspired by their courage and how they are willing to face these challenges and make new choices.
So let's say when you go to a case and the family tells you the story that this dog is aggressive and this and that, and you hear the story of the human, and then you watch and you see the dog as well, and you get to know the story of the dog as well from the dog's point of view, which one affects you the most, the story of the human or the story of the dog? Which one affects you the most to take action and get involved with that case, for example?
I have found that when I'm called in to help somebody in the home, we can look to address the dog's behavior. And where I'm at now, I don't want to change the dog or the dog's behavior so much as change the environment so that the dog gets a chance to make better choices. We can do that, and the dog can do that successfully and sustainably, and the owner may or may not have a personal change, but at least the dog has changed its behavior. What I have seen to be more profound for people is when they are willing to be as open and teachable as the dog is, and to meet the dog where it's at, and to put aside their own expectations of themselves as well as the dog, and stay humble and willing and positive in what they're doing. And one of the things that is deeply moving for me is to see how humans change by way of helping their dogs. It's the not so secret ingredient to what I do. And I know, for me personally, having survived a lot, I have an ability to hear people in a way that I probably didn't before. And so I'm better able to help them help their dogs. And that is, it's special to be a part of that dynamic.
I see. I understand exactly what you mean. You also put yourself in that human's place and also that dog's place, and based on your experiences, you try to understand both of them and help them.
There's a relatability. I have found for myself that when I go into somebody's home, while I am observing the dog and listening to what the humans are saying, I'm also looking at the environment for the humans. What books do you have on the shelf? What music do you have out? What kind of artwork do you have? What can I connect to with the human that gives us a window of relatability? And I like that. I like being able to do that. I think it's kind of a fun challenge. I meet fascinating, interesting people. I learn a lot from people that are in fields and levels of education or life experience that I don't know anything about, and somehow we're still able to parlay it into how we can work together to help the dog.
That's interesting. So, I've been working with dog owners and training dogs for over 15 years now, and you're the first dog trainer that also, just like me, says that I don't use treats or food or tricks or force to change dogs' behavior. And for the past, as I said, 15 years, I've been, mentoring dog owners and preaching this idea to dog owners, and I found you, and this is very exciting to talk to somebody who's like-minded and share the information. And I want to dig in a little bit to this idea of no food and no force idea. But my personal experience has been that people have this challenge of understanding that dog and dog training and modification equals food and treat. And I want to debunk that idea. And I have experience, I have had a lot of dogs myself that personally I have trained dog and my own dogs, and personally worked with other dogs. And I see the possibility and the clarity and the more effectiveness of not using treats or food when it comes to behavior or changing behavior or training. And I want to see and hear and learn from you, what made you to start not to use treats, first of all, or food to work with dogs, and what do you see the effects of it?
Sure. Thank you for asking. So I'll preface my answer with saying that the dog decides what it responds to best. And I know dogs arrive in places where they're having difficulty making choices. So sometimes we have to be creative. I know that the fundamental positive reinforcers are food and treats, play, smelling, attention, and affection. And I need to find where the dog wants to work from. That said, when I first started a decade ago, I was copying a lot of the popular aversive techniques, choke chains and prong collars, and show that, prove that I'm dominant and those kinds of things, which I understand now were not only disrespectful and not humane, but in the long game, they weren't really effective, and certainly not great for the dog. About 5 or 6 years ago, my wife Brooklyn and I got adopted a pit bull that had excellent behavior, but when she was triggered, she would actually go for the kill. She attempted to kill one of my dogs on multiple occasions.
Wow.
And almost succeeded. And it was baffling to me because her behavior, in terms of the kind of obedience that I would have used to focus on, was excellent. What I think probably people would call more balanced work, where I would use some punitive methods, some positive punishment or negative reinforcement, and I would couple it with treats as well and food. So I saw changes there, but this was a dog that seemed to already arrive with an understanding of obedience, but it was the trigger that really threw me. So I found out a necessity that I needed to find a different way of working with this dog. So I want to be clear, I'm not anti-treat because I have to find what works for the dog. I am pro-dog choosing. And I just have found over the years a lot of people who struggled with the way they had used treats or seen behaviors change, but not really seen the triggers be removed for the dogs. There were challenges that more and more people were coming up against, and I happened to be exploring human attention and affection as a way of helping dogs help themselves. And so that's really kind of the rabbit hole. That's the rabbit hole that I went down for a while. And what's marvelous is that, as you know from experience, that there is a lot that a dog can do and is willing to do for human attention and affection. And what's special about that is it doesn't require anything outside of the human being. So if we add that to our toolkit of how we can help a dog, whether it's play, whether it's smelling, whether it's treats or food, if we add affection and attention to our toolkit, we are not only deepening the relationship and the bond between the dog and the human, we also are working with much greater capacity in terms of how we can help our dogs help themselves. I have colleagues that are just masterful at their work, and they will rely on treats, and that's their go-to. 80% of the time, I think that's what a dog responds to. And they will say, as we talk about it, that for them, as it is for me, ultimately, the goal is to not have to rely on anything. And that's where being able to land with the human bond can be freeing. in a lot of ways. So that is what I have spent a lot of years exploring, and I have seen that dogs have been able to have a lot of success with that and learn more and expand what I have, and have that as something that is available to me that I can share with people.
From personal experience, that is, I understand exactly what you mean. We could add layers to the learning or the connection that we have with our dogs, but I think it's better not to start with certain tools and ideas before we have that connection. I think we forget that we need to make connection first with the dog before we add other gadgets and tools, because what happens, I think, when you don't have connection and you have the tools like treats or food, then you're relying on those tools or those treats to make connection. And I think, in my opinion, when you're building that type of connection where the dog is and you are relying on treats to connect, then lots of bad behaviors actually develops from that addiction. I call it addiction because the dog is addicted to food now, and the owner is addicted to feed the dog treats.
Sure. It seems like the way I hear you saying is it looks as if the dog has become wholly dependent on the food or the treats, and the owner has become dependent on the food or the treats, and neither the human or the dog have healthy dependent relationship with each other. Yeah, I hear that. It's something fascinating. Karen Pryor, who's a master clicker training, and Ken Ramirez, who's running schools now. We know that there's something in the click itself that speaks to what happens in the amygdala for the brain and the dog. There's something about it that nothing else can reach, and that's fascinating to me that works. And one of the things that I really appreciate in talking with experts who know that they can go first and foremost with treats is they will say that the goal is to not have to rely on the food. The goal is to be able to use that as a building block so that the dog generally understands when sorrow appears, something good happens. When sorrow appears, or when the human appears, something good happens. So, and I hear what you're saying about that. Obviously, addiction is a particular word for me. There is a heavy reliance on changing an external level of behavior at the expense of building a deeper possible bond. If I'm hearing you correctly, that's what I hear you saying.
Yeah, that's the challenge that I have with dog owners. To start to build that clean foundation that it doesn't rely on anything actually. There was a study a few years ago done by Dr. Gregory Burns, I mentioned earlier before. He did a research that he scanned a dog's brain with the MRI machine, and he found that the results of this research was that he found that they were giving treats to the dogs when they were quiet and they were doing something in the machine, and they were giving them treats. And also the other group was that they were saying good boy or good girl to the dog, right? And they found that the dogs who were given just praise as a verbal praise, their brain was more active as a pleasure than the dogs who were fed a sausage or a food or treat or something. So the results of this experiment was eventually they found out that dogs are more reactive to the hand that gives the treat rather than treat itself. The hand, the human, they're more reactive to that.
Interesting. His name is, I remember you pointing him out, and there's a lot more for me to look into that. There was an exhibit out here in Los Angeles at our science center with new information that showed that the reward system in the dog's brain, and this is along the lines of what you're saying, fires as much for its human's attention and affection as it does for food. And it's a fascinating thing to explore. If we're at the very least, because we know food can be as effective as it is, at the very least, if we can deepen our understanding and make a tangible, teachable practice of what we can do in regards to the dog's response to human attention and affection, that would be, I can only see that as a positive experience for anybody. Owners, trainers, wherever anybody falls on the training spectrum, if you will, that would be a really powerful thing to explore. And personally, it's fascinating to me. I'm exploring actually recently. There's a doctor actually in Canada who is a specialist in puppies. So I was talking with Dr. Cutler recently about insecure attachment, and I'm fascinated by this. There's not a lot of information about it, in part because it's hard to really quantify the study. We can't take two puppies and create healthy attachment with one and neglect the other one. That wouldn't be ethical. So there's not much that we know, and we're usually relying on people's feedback. Well, this is what I heard from the rescuer, et cetera, and then we make up stories, and that's what we're dealing with. But this reality of insecure attachment that dogs experience, and the behavior, at the very least, the anxious behavior, other behaviors that might be connected, like resource guarding and things like that, all of that being born out of the dog's inability to form a secure attachment with its human. Mm-hmm. So in having this conversation with her, I was struck by the fact that there's not a whole lot of information about something that seems to be a cornerstone of problematic behavior in dogs, for dogs. And that's something I'd like to learn a lot more about too. I mean, as you know, if you're 15 years in, I feel, maybe this is true for you, for me, I feel like there's so much more for me to learn. But now I've got this experience, and obviously, the show is it's a unique and amazing opportunity. And we just finished filming our second season, and I can, for myself, see the growth between season 1 and season 2. And I think, oh my gosh, now that I'm at this level of understanding, there's so much more for me to know, and
so much more you can do, actually, too.
Yeah, true. That's right. And so much more service I can offer. Yeah.
One of the interesting things that I realized, this is about, again, 12 years ago, it was when I was running this beagle, Jonah, agility. I was doing agility with him, and he was one of the few beagles that were running agility, at least in British Columbia, Canada. There was not many beagles who could run in agility courses. And one of the interesting things was that when we were doing agility with him and we were running the course, they were telling us to run naked. What that means is no collar, no treats, no food, no tour, nothing. Yeah. And we had to run the course naked. And one day we were doing that, and one day we ran the course perfectly. He did perfect, and I was so proud of him. He did perfectly. But at the end, the judge came and told me that, you know what, you did great, but I have to disqualify you because you forgot to remove the collar. I just forgot to remove the collar.
Oh, wow.
Right?
Wow.
And then that hit me. Okay, we are trying to have fun with our dogs and connect with our dogs and have these activities to do with our dogs, but then we're picking on whether the dog is wearing collar or has treats or not. So you couldn't even run the dog, like, you can't have treats in your hand and all that. So a light bulb moment came to my mind. If at the end I have to run the course naked, why don't I train my dog naked? So it dawned on me that I should be training dogs without food. If we want to get results without food, then we should train them without food, right? So that's how I kind of got motivated, also started to train dogs without food. And not, again, it's not that I'm against giving treats or food to a dog. It's just that I think when you're building that foundation, I think, again, we need to focus on building that connection rather than depending on treats or food. Because, again, they say, most dog trainers, they emphasize on that you do give treats to the dog, but you have to phase it out. The problem is that people don't phase it out.
Right.
They don't learn how to phase it out. And I think that becomes a big problem. And I think I have been thinking about it, as you say, we learn and we study, we try to understand dogs better, more and more. And based on my experience, I've realized that all these dogs who have behavioral issues, they have been all trained with food.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Right? And so the foundation is wrong. I don't know if you have come across, you have lots of cases that you have worked with, and all this aggression and all these problem dogs that we have, including, the case that I remember you worked on. I was watching one of the episodes that you worked with this lady. She wouldn't give away the idea of not having the dog sleep in bed. Right?
Yes.
Right? Yep. It was a torture for her to do that. And again, that affection that the dog owner has towards the dog, even cases like that, I think you have also good case study to figure out if they all have this issue, that it's all treat trained. And I think treat training causes all these behaviors to develop.
Yeah, I think to be more specific in what you're saying, oftentimes when I meet with somebody, I might be the third, fourth, fifth, sometimes eighth trainer that they're working with. And for better or for worse, often I'm the last trainer that they want it. Okay, this is it. This is our last chance. People come with a certain kind of desperation. I can usually tell as I talk through with the clients when we're sitting down, whether it's an initial phone call or we're sitting down to meet in person, I can usually tell what their grasp was of the previous training. I always want to know what the previous training was like, because the through line is the human. So if I'm coming to you and you're my fifth trainer, well, I'm clearly the person that's gone through 5 trainers. So assuming that any of those trainers probably knew what they were doing and were trained, et cetera, not counting people that are recommending abusing dogs. Then my question goes to, well, assuming that those people brought you good technique that they have seen as effective and as scientifically sound, why did it not work for you? And some cases, you said something that I had keyed into, and that is that the humans weren't able to get off of relying on food. So they may well have been given a practice to do that or a protocol to do that. And in a lot of cases, I find people want the behavior to change so that they don't have to. Mm-hmm. So the idea, whether or not one is aware of it, that I could take what this educated trainer has given me and rely on food. Yeah, so I think that it's, again, I'm not in any of the sessions that happened with previous trainers, but in listening and in knowing a lot of the reputable trainers that have worked with my clients before I got there, either the clients didn't grasp what was being given to them, it didn't work for them, they didn't stick with it. That happens a lot. If I have a client say to me, well, the trainer was great, but I didn't stick with it, well, I don't put that on the trainer. I make a note to myself, okay, if I'm working with somebody who didn't stick with it, then what do I have to offer them that might seem more realistic and practical, and can that be helpful? And a lot of people seem to respond to that as well, to simplify it. Coming back to one of the people that I started to follow early on is Dr. Ian Dunbar, and I met him at an APDT conference in 2013 in Washington. And he said to me, when I started to talk to him about what I wanted to explore, he said, it sounds to me like you're talking about naked dog training. And he said, I just started to hear about this. And he described exactly what you described. And you're actually the first trainer that I've spoken to 7 years later who has actually had that direct experience. So that's kind of cool that comes around. And I remember him saying, that I'm speaking for myself, that I have to be educated and I have to know what's going on. I have to know the science of it and work from that place of understanding. But the client doesn't necessarily want to hear any of that from me. They want it, I have to make it as simple as possible so that they feel like they can do it. And so that is a lot of what I think we have to navigate as respectful trainers. We have to navigate. I don't get into trainer bashing, and I just stay away from all of that because I don't find it useful for anybody. I do take note of what the people's experience with previous trainers were, not so much about the trainers, but to see what they did and didn't respond to and what they were willing to move forward with. And as I said, a lot of people would just rather rely on something outside of themselves so that they don't have to change.
Very interesting. Now let's talk about the human psychology as a form of dog training. As a dog trainer, you may agree with me too that is, I think I would say 70 to 90% of dog training is human training, and the rest is actually the dog training itself. So what do you think is the problem with dog owners who have these dogs who have behavioral issues or aggression or all these behaviors? Is it the dog's fault, or is it the human fault, first of all? And second of all, if it's the human's fault, what is it that causing them to not to do the right thing?
Well, it's a much deeper question. People are savvy enough to the world of dog training that by the time I get into their home, they will say to me, well, I know it's my fault. That's not entirely true. We're dealing with genetics. We're dealing with a host of generations of influences. We're dealing with what are breed-specific behaviors. Having a blue heeler in a house without really hard because a blue heeler is built for certain behavior, for example. So we have to take a lot of that into consideration coming into it. We got to think about the wellness of the dog. As you know, if a dog doesn't feel well, it generally is not going to behave as well. A lot of people aren't. For years, I didn't think about it. I just went right in there to change the behavior, and I didn't really think in the greater context of where the dog was coming from internally. This may be a bit of a leap, but if we're looking at the fact that humans have domesticated dogs for, I guess, upwards of 15,000 years maybe at this point, we humans are directly and to a great part responsible for the dog behavior that we have that we don't want. In many cases because of the way that humans have chosen to breed them or not breed them. And in terms of the humans in present day who have a dog that needs help, what I typically find is that an owner just didn't know what they were choosing to reinforce or what they were using to reinforce is leading to a perpetuation of the behavior. They just didn't know. A lot of people, I'm sure you see this, a lot of people don't necessarily know what stress cues are for their dogs. Whereas you've got the eyes of 15 years to experience. I learned recently that the tail wags slightly to the left when the dog sees its person of familiarity than it does to the right. Fascinating stuff, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
So even introducing the language of understanding, and I think one of the places where I need to be stronger is to come in assuming that people know a lot, mostly because I don't want to insult their intelligence. But the reality is that people need to know what stress cues are. They need to have awareness about their dog's stress threshold, et cetera, et cetera. So all of this, to answer your question in a very long but intentional way, is that by the time we get to the aggressive behavior, it is very rarely a surprise. It's very rarely out of the blue. It actually can be fairly predictable if we're able to create context and look at the antecedents that lead to the behavior that leads to the consequence. And there are cases, as I'm sure you've experienced, where for whatever reason, one might lay out a very clear training protocol beginning with please keep the dog safe, especially if you're dealing with dog aggression in the house. Please keep the dog safe. And the people can't do that. Please keep them separate. And the people can't do that. So then I'm dealing with an aspect of the human's understanding that is, I'm not really sure that I can get through unless they're willing. You know what I mean?
Right.
It is a long answer, and it's a really important question, and it is never the dog's fault. That I can say. It's never the dog's fault. When dogs aren't given opportunities to make choices that are good for them, there are only so many behaviors that they're going to be able to express. You know, so the more I, as a dog owner and trainer, take responsibility for the environment and that I set up for a dog, the more I find that those dogs respond more positively, more quickly, and more sustainably. And so I take care of my side of this. I take care of my side of the street, and then we'll see what the dog can do with that. And if the dogs are responsible, I'll deal with that when I die. They can tell me about it later, you know. But I'm going to put it on me until a dog tells me otherwise.
Right. And let's talk about what you think about, let's say, your own dogs. When you get your own dog, you have your own dogs, right?
Yeah. I have 4 with us. We had 8. 3 were fosters. 1 got adopted. 1 of our own dogs passed, and so now we have 6 in our care.
And these 6, did you do any basic training with them? Did you do anything with them, or did you just let them be?
Interesting. It's an interesting question. So with Kingston the Terrier, who's with us, who's now 13, I started off, like I said, not knowing anything, and then moved into a lot of treat-based work. My Jindo Renge, who has a serious bite history, both human and dog. I did a lot of treat-based work and also some positive punishment and negative reinforcement with him early on when I didn't know much better. He is so highly food-driven. To this day, he's so highly food-driven that he's very easy to train that way, but I have to be very, very careful about that. So I'll use it when it comes to medication or something like that. But I did a lot of training early on, and haven't needed to do, we do upkeep on stuff, but haven't needed to do that kind of training that I did in the beginning for a while. Socialization has been key also. It's not the answer, but it is really, as you know, it's vital to dogs being able to maintain a lot of desired behaviors. And then with my newer dogs, it's kind of been a mix. You know, the 2 foster dogs that we have with us came from situations where the behavior was very dangerous, and they ended up, I rarely do this, but in both of these cases, my company, the Zen Dog, officially adopted them, and they lived at the facility with us for quite some time. And so they were socializing on a regular basis, and they were interacting with a staff of 15, and they began to desensitize and counter-condition and habituate in a lot of ways that were just part of the daily routine. Now those 2 fosters are living with us, and they have gone from not being able to be around other dogs without high levels of reactivity to my dogs passing by without an incident. I've got a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. Both of the foster dogs are accepting of my kids, and so it's really kind of cool without doing the formal daily training plan that I used to go through. The changes of COVID have put me in a situation where I have to manage my family and my time and these dogs differently.
So let's say if you got a puppy now, would you do training with that? What kind of training would you do as well?
Yeah, I'm actually doing that right now. One of the things that I love about with a client, I don't have a puppy, and I'm not allowed to get one for a long time. So I just started working with a dog, was found in a field at 4 weeks old, and we met a couple of weeks ago. I think the puppy was 13 weeks old at that point. So puppies are going to be puppies. What I love about puppies is that there's so much joy and enthusiasm, and there's a freshness about it, and very, very rarely am I dealing with outright aggression, and I just see a lot of hope in them. I like to see what the dog responds to right out of the gate. Is it food? Is it affection? Is it food and treats? Is it affection? What are the positive reinforcers it's going to respond to? And typically with a puppy, all 4 of those they're going to respond to some degree. Smelling, playing and food and treats and human affection. So I love that because there's a lot to work with. I also like it because their training windows tend to be shorter because they need to take a nap. They get tired faster. So it's because they can work in smaller increments several times a day rather than feeling overwhelmed by the amount of time that they might put in. And I really just, the rule of thumb for me is that this dog is going to tell me, as Dr. Susan Friedman says, it's a study of one. So whatever I know, I'm looking at the dog in front of me. This dog's going to tell me how it's going to learn. And I'm going to focus on what I do want rather than what I don't want. And I want the dog to understand that when blank happens, something good happens. So that gives me a lot of room to shape and capture and reinforce behavior in simple and effective ways. And always I'm using my physical affection where it's appropriate. I'm using my praise, tone, voice, the words that I'm using, so that I know that everything I do that might include another reinforcer also includes me in it.
And do you do like basic obedience with your dog?
I don't at this point, but they don't need basic obedience the way that they needed in the beginning. I do teach it to puppies. It's helpful. It's safe for a lot of people. It's effective for a lot of owners. It's what they can work with. And, I want a dog, for example, the puppy that I'm working with right now, the puppy's not out on walks yet, but when they get out on walks, the owner ultimately wants a dog. It's this beautiful little Aussie Shepherd mix. And they want the dog to stop at the sidewalk. First, that they want that built into the dog. So we know that we're working towards that. So we will do plenty of what is called obedience work. I like to think of it in terms of directions. I don't want to get involved with commands because I don't really want to be in a relationship with something that I'm going to command, but I want to give directions to a dog that's going to help it make better choices. So the answer is yes, and I will do anything that's going to work with the dog that's in the realm of what's appropriate and respectful for that dog. And I have more tools to work with now than I used to, so I don't have to rely so heavily on one or the other or be deficient in an area, which I have been in the past.
Interesting. My approach in general for training dogs and dog owners is, I say, you mentioned food motivated dog, right?
Yeah.
In my opinion, I think everybody, every human being, every dog, every living thing is a food motivated creature. And I think, when you say, or you think as dog owner yourself, you're saying, okay, this dog is food motivated. Well, every human being is food motivated. If I offer you pizza or, barbecue chicken, you wouldn't say no to it, right? But if I say, let's go for, game of golf, or let's go and play this, or let's go and do that, you always say yes to those too. There are, I think the misunderstanding is, when we say a dog is food motivated, is I think what we are saying is this dog loves food, right? And I love food too. But the thing is that for me, everything else is more important than food. I would rather have, let's say, my wife's happiness, the joy that I get from my wife's happiness, for example, compared to if she says, we have made pizza tonight. That the happiness wins over the pizza for me, even though I'm foodie, right? I love food. So I think when it comes to food motivation, I rely on teaching dog owners basic obedience, so they use that as a tool to connect with their dog. So instead of using food to train the dog to, let's say, sit and stay and come and all that, I encourage them to use play and praise to teach them to get to that, to do those stuff. And I think, in my opinion, again, it's not to command the dog. We call it 7 basic obedience command, but these are tools in a way for the human to connect with their dog. I think these are exercises that they can do to build that connection. And instead of feeding the dog, I teach them how to use play and praise. to connect with dog.
Play is an incredible way. It's an awesome way to bond with a dog. There's a trainer, Dr. Amy Cook, who has something called the Play Way, and she focuses on play as a means of helping dogs work through aggressive behavior. And there are two other women, Emily Strong and Allie Bender. They wrote a book, Canine Enrichment for the Real World, and they've been exploring flight training, where they take dogs' impulses to fight or flight, and they actually build on that in a way that can reinforce in a positive way what the dog actually can do, as opposed to not. And it's actually, your examples are great, because I had pizza for lunch. So yes, I responded to that. And my son wanted to play Legos, so playing Legos with him brought me a joy that I didn't necessarily get from the pizza, but if I didn't eat the pizza, I probably would have not been a joy to be around. And if you asked me to golf, I probably wouldn't do it. But if you,
yes,
right?
Yes.
So, like finding what it is that I respond to, there's so much to work with. And I think also, to your point, the humans going in don't realize how much they can contribute. I don't want you to send me your dog. I'm not going to fix it like a microwave. I want you to have the experience of helping your dog help itself, because that is a transformational experience that's really special, and it's deep and profound. And if we can utilize aspects of the everyday human relationship, thank you, please, hey, come on over here, I want to show you, a lot of things that actually become conversational.
Yeah.
If we can utilize what's happening and build on that and reinforce that, there's a lot to be built on there. There are certainly times that are appropriate for training. Okay, we're doing this. We're working on dog socialization. We're working on leash work. We're working on door reactivity. We're working on these things right now. And then there's the stuff that happens in the day-to-day that is really easy to reinforce through a pet or a praise or a massage or something like that.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, going back to the food thing, I think food has its own time and space and place. You could eat, and then once you're fed, you can feed your dog, and once it's fed and it's satisfied and it has enough food, then you can go and direct it to training, bonding, right? So it's get rid of that sensation first of eating food, and then
I've heard that.
Let the dog focus on the real thing that is there. Because I think there are trainers that they say, use their food for training. That in my opinion is even worse, because you're dictating here I am the dictator of the food, and I'm the only one, and pay attention to me, because you're starving. The dog is in starvation mode, or in hungry mode, and you're kind of teaching the dog to actually hate you. It works opposite.
Yeah, it's interesting that Mike Shikasha, the great Mike Shikasha, he's a newer colleague of mine, and he's just been a great support as I'm accelerating my learning. And we were talking about resource guarding at length, and one of the things that has been helpful to me, to your point, is to make sure that the dog is fed, so that when we actually get to resource guarding, we're looking at the behavior more specifically, rather than you are actually hungry and I'm making this situation worse.
Exactly.
Simple life-saving tips.
Yeah. Now let's talk about your show and what you do in your show. So before we get deeper in your show, I wanted to personally understand, I noticed that when you're dealing with a case, you actually talk to the dog. Is that directly to the dog or the dog owner?
That's a good question. I get asked this a lot. Why do I talk to the dogs? There are a few reasons that I talk to the dogs. One, it's a way of helping me de-escalate a situation. So I get scared, And I want to make sure I'm not reacting from a place of fear. So my effort to communicate with a dog, whether or not the dog understands the words, and some of the times they will, particularly if I'm offering some directions. But mostly, if I'm communicating with the dog and I'm making an effort,
I know you're scared,
to speak to the dog, it will change my tone, it will change the intensity with which I speak, it will change the intention behind it, and it often de-escalates and softens situations. And there are plenty of examples of that in the show. Mm-hmm. So that's something that over the years kind of became a habit. I have to be careful that it doesn't get in the way of what I really want the dog to hear. Mm-hmm. Sometimes when I get scared, I overtalk a situation with a dog, so I got to be mindful about that. Or with clients, I need to let them speak and let the moments breathe. But yeah, it's just become a thing, and it's just a habit.
So, last question. What is new in your show, Dog Impossible, on Nat Geo Wild? What can we expect to see in the new season?
Well, in the second season, thank you for asking. I'm really excited about the second season for a few reasons. One, we started filming, and then COVID hit the Los Angeles area, and then I made a decision to shut the facility down for prudence and safety reasons. And about 2 months after we shut down, we had put together a COVID protocol for how we would film, and presented that to the parent company, which is the Disney company, and they greenlit it, and we were successfully able to complete filming 8 episodes. We got tested every week. We followed strict COVID protocols. Nobody got sick. No dogs got hurt. No people got hurt. So it was a remarkable success in that way. Wildly different. I wasn't able to be, once we came back after COVID, I wasn't able to be in anybody's home. So we would set up cameras, and then the operators would work them remotely, and I would call them and talk to them on an iPad and guide them through. It was a real challenge for me. And it was great because I got to see how much I know and how effective it is and how flexible I can be. I also, in the 2.5 years since we finished filming season 1, I have grown and changed a lot. So I'll give you 3 simple examples of things that I just moved beyond. When we look at what we would call a setup for a dog-to-dog introduction, in the yard, for example, and we would be gently holding a dog and allowing the other dog to come from behind and smell. I've done away with that entirely, where I want to let the dogs dictate the interaction as much as possible. So we'll use leashes or harnesses and pick better dogs for the visiting dog to work with, so that we're minimizing the stress for the visiting dog. That's a big thing. In the door exercise, instead of waiting for the dog to relax completely, which can put undue stress on a dog or potentially lead to a dog shutting down, what we have done is I have helped the owners better identify what the stress cues are, so that they can praise every downshift, every reduction of stress cues, every de-escalation of the intensity of the stress behavior, so that the dog actually gets rewarded along the way, so that we're not only focusing on what we do want, we're further getting away from what we don't want for the dog. Third thing, when I'm looking at how we're doing socializations in the yard, the actual dog socialization, I'm making better selections with the dogs that they're meeting. I'm giving them a lot more time. It became an overriding goal for me to keep dogs below a stress threshold, so that I could be a better teacher, I could represent better. I get letters from kids that are 10 years old, and I want to make sure that I'm a better role model. And even though it says on the show, do not try this at home, people don't listen to that. They send me these scary emails saying, hey, listen, I'm going to put 2 muzzles on my dogs and let them work it out. And that's just a terrifying idea, especially for the dog. So I've become a lot more conscientious of what I'm demonstrating. I don't ultimately have control over the editing. I've had a great experience working with the network and the producers, but I have just changed and grown in a way that I feel good about as a dog trainer. Had an opportunity and made a commitment to further my education, and I became certified with the Council of Professional Dog Trainers in Knowledge Assess. So I'm actually able to support support the extensive experience I have with a deeper understanding of all of that is happening. My learning is happening in real time on the show. Like you're going to see from the first episode to the last episode how Matt Beisner is changing, you know, in how he works. And we were able to help a lot of dogs in some really good ways.
Nice. And do you know when we should expect it to be aired, the second season?
I have an idea, but I'm not allowed to say yet.
All right. Now, before we end the show, do you have any message to dog owners?
Yeah, actually, the thing that I keep coming back to personally is to become more considerate. And I don't just mean that in a compassionate way, although that's key. I mean that the practice of consideration, there's something here that I don't know, the knowing of which would change the way I help this dog. And I would say we're living at a time where we could use more consideration with our dogs and with ourselves and with each other. So if I am able to impart anything, if people take anything positive away from what I've been able to present on Dog Impossible, it is the act of consideration and how that can change a dog and a human's life forever.
Nice. Sweet. Yes. Kind. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Saro.
I appreciate you coming on the show, and I'm hoping that we can do this again and talk.
Be happy to.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much, Matt.
Yeah, thank you. Take care and enjoy your time with your wife.